Hey y'all, we're going to finish out this chapter. It's just 2 paragraphs left and then we'll start the last chapter. And I brought a special guest. This is my puppy Reese's. She loves reading with me. Every time I read, she likes to sit in my lap. So say hi, guys. Hey. All right, let's finish out the chapter. We're starting here with Lewis. Lewis nodded thoughtfully. We need to create a strong bond with the natives upriver. We'll have to urge the other tribes to ignore the Sioux. That's the only way our country will be able to trade with the Indians of the plains. The captains didn't speak for a few minutes. Lost my place, y'all, sorry. Seaman gave a great, noisy sigh and laid his big head on his front paws. At least there was no bloodshed, Lewis said at last. We didn't establish friendly relations, so we can't count on our meeting with the Teton Sioux as a success. But at least we avoided a fight. All right. Chapter 6. Our last chapter for the day. Winter among the Indians. October 1804 through April 1805. Autumn came to the Missouri River. Along the banks, leaves changed from green to gold. As the corpse of the Discovery made its way upstream, the boats were surrounded by creatures on the move. The sky was filled with flocks of honking, squawking geese, and the ducks headed to a warmer waters. Large herds of elk and antelope crossed the river, migrating south like the fowl. A hearty wind ruffled the seaman's new winter coat. Chilly nights killed off the mosquitoes, and the river water sparkled a clear sunshine. In early October, the explorers began to see the abandoned villages along the banks of the Missouri. A passing trapper said the Arikara Indians once lived in these earth lodges, but most of the tribe had been killed by smallpox over the last 25 years. Only a few thousand Arikias had survived, and they lived on one small island. The trappers also said that these Indians sometimes joined with the Sioux to attack the tribes living further up the river. After their unpleasant dealings with the Teton Sioux, the captains wondered if the Arikas would welcome outsiders. The expedition soon reached the island where the Arikas lived in 4 villages. On October 8th, Lewis took some of the men out to meet the Indians. 2 days later, the captains held a formal meeting with them, including the usual speech, military display, and gift-giving. The captains offered whiskey to their Arikavas, but their chiefs refused. Recalling their meeting with the Trenton Sioux Indian chiefs, the captains were both surprised and relieved. Hey, Reese, stop. The Arikas gave a warm welcome to their visitors. They escorted the explorers through their village and proudly showed off their carefully tended vegetable gardens. When the Indians offered some of their harvest, the men rejoiced. For months they had eaten mostly meat and a little wild fruit. They longed for the corn, squash, and beans that the Indians cultivated. As the explorers toured the Arika villages, curious Indians trailed after them, staring. The Indians avoided Seaman, who was much larger and darker than their village dogs. They pointed at the explorers' clothing and beards, but most of the attention focused on York. None of the Arikias had ever seen a black man. The adult villagers said York was big medicine. Some of the villagers' children darted between the explorer's legs to peek at his amazing black-skinned man. York found the Indians' curiosity amusing. I'm going to turn up my screen, y'all. The brightness of my screen. Okay. He pretended not to hear the children approach. Then he would suddenly turn on them and roar. When the children scattered like frightened mice, York laughed until his belly ached. "Halloo!" he hollered, showing his arm muscles and making loud growling noises. "Here strides the York beast." York leaped at some children. They yelped, scurrying away to hide behind their lodges. Seaman watched the commotion until he was sure it was a game. Then he barked playfully and ran across the York. Fee, fi, fo, fum, now the York beast has come. York laughed heartily at his own joke and stamped his foot to make Seaman run faster. Beware! York howled fiercely, and small Indians' faces peeping around the side lodges. York was finished. From the blackest depths of the sea by Master Clark, tamed in the farthest recesses of the caves where the hairy monsters dwell, York picked up a heavy log and hoisted it above his head to show off his strength. Touch the York beast at your peril. His favorite food is children. York, that's enough, ordered Clark, shaking his head and trying not to smile. You keep it up and the Archaeus will take your jokes seriously. We don't want to mislead these kind of people. After spending a few pleasant days with the Archaeus, the expedition proceeded on. By the end of October, the explorers were entering the territory of the Mandan Indians. The captains had heard the Mandan from trappers and traders, and they had hoped to set up winter camp near these Indians. On the 24th of October, the corps met the Mandan hunting party. Some of the explorers could sign or speak a few words of the Mandan language, and the Mandans had learned a few English words from passing traders. After friendly inductions, the chief of the hunting party invited the explorers to his village. Lewis took Seaman and some of the men while Clark and the rest made camp. Lewis and Seaman walked briskly beside the Mandan chief. The Indians pointed out fields where his people grew corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, and tobacco. When the explorers entered the village, they passed out 40 low circular living huts surrounding a large open space. The most important villagers lived close to the central plaza, which contained a single cedar post and a big lodge. As the Arika villages, Indians came out of their huts to watch the newcomers. The little curly-tailed village dogs sniffed at Seaman, but he ignored them and stayed close to Lewis. The Mandans were friendly, and they didn't stare and point at the explorers. They were used to all types of visitors because their villages were the central marketplace of the region. Indians from many friendly tribes came to trade, bring livestock, produce, and furs, buffalo hides, blankets, clothing, and firearms, even musical instruments in the late summer. In the late summer, the Mandan villages overflowed with traders from Crow, Cree, Kiowa, Cheyenne, Assiniboine, and Arifro tribes. Y'all, I really have no idea how to pronounce those. I'm doing my best based off the phonetic skills that I know, and they could be wrong. So I just want to encourage you to not skip over them. Try and read them. Try and read words that you don't know, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but do your best when you're reading them, guys. American traders from St. Louis, as well as British and Canadian traders from the Northwest and Hudson's Bay companies, also journeyed the Mandan villages. Back in camp, Lewis described the Mandan village to Clark. The Mandans are peaceful farmers, just like the trappers told us, he said cheerfully. They've been trading with white people for years. If we build our winter camp near here, we'll get along fine with our neighbors. Lewis was in a great mood. He tossed a stick for Seaman to retrieve. When the dog brought it back, Lewis snatched it and hid it behind his back. Seaman lowered his head and his front paws and barked. His rear end was sticking up and his tail was wagging. Lewis laughed and tickled Seaman's whiskers with the stick. Then he rolled the dog into his back and rubbed his belly. Seaman wiggled away and bounded around the captain, barking happily. The Mandans seem friendly and helpful, Lewis continued, his enthusiasm bursting through his words. I think they have enough corn for their people and for trading with us during the winter. Lewis tossed the stick again, and Seaman pounced on it. Clark was holding a hot stone wrapped in flannel against his sore neck. Sometimes he was troubled by rheumatism, a various condition marked by stiffness, pain, or swelling in the muscles. He was troubled by rheumatism, and the condition had been bothering him for the last few days. His mood was somber. I know what somber is. I want y'all to look up somber. Melancholy is kind of like the word dark and gloomy, so it's an adjective to describe somebody, and it's just kind of like kind of dreary, like He waited while Lewis played with Seaman, then asked how many villages are located nearby and how many natives live in these villages. The Mandan chief said that there were 5 villages in this area, 2 Mandan and 3 Hadista. From what I saw and heard, I'd estimate the Indian population at more than 4,000 in all, the villages combined. Meriwether, that's more people than that live in St. Louis, exclaimed Clark, or Washington, D.C., or our nation's capital city. How many are warriors? Clark asked pointedly. Sorry, my face is over the recording. It's hard to see. Lewis thought for a minute. Maybe a quarter of the population, I guess. As he worked out the arithmetic and considered the expedition's safety, he frowned. Seaman sat down with the stick in his mouth, watching Lewis when Lewis spoke. Seaman wagged his tail hopefully, but Lewis ignored the stick and looked at Clark. Seaman stretched himself out with a noisy grunt, dropped the stick on the ground, and laid his chin in his front paws. Almost 1,000 warriors are living in the 5 villages altogether, Lewis concluded. Clark raised an eyebrow to look at Lewis. The man didn't sound friendly enough, Meriwether, but remember, we have fewer than 30 men in the Corps of Discovery, and another 20 men in the group that will return to St. Louis next spring. That's fewer than 50 fighting men compared to 1,000 Indian warriors. We must maintain a heavy guard until we are very sure that we can trust these people. Of course, Lewis nodded thoughtfully. We'll keep the system we always use when there's a threat. Only one of us at a time will leave camp. The other will command the soldiers guarding our supplies. On October 29th, the captains held a formal meeting with the Mandans. Lewis gave a speech, the explorers staged a military display, and the Indian chiefs were given small gifts. After the meeting, Lewis had a talk with Black Cat, one of the most powerful Mandan chiefs. Black Cat spoke plainly. When the Indians of the different villages heard you were coming, they all came in from hunting to see. They expected great presents. They were disappointed, and some were dissatisfied. Black Cat did not mean these words as a threat. He was simply explaining that his people's feelings to the white captain. Lewis listened quietly and spoke calm and reassuring voice. Sorry. He remembered the recent discussion with Clark. The explorers would be surrounded by thousands of Indians from the winter months, and they all needed to stay calm to try and understand each other. The Corps began building their winter quarters on November 2nd of 1804. They chose a spot on the eastern side of the Missouri near the mouth of the Knife River. The location offered plenty of fresh water, wood, and game. It was across the river from one of the Mandan villages, so trading with the Indians would be easy. The men felled heavy trees to construct the walls for the fort, which they laid with a great triangle with rows of huts inside the stockade. They designed the forts to resist attacks with 18-foot walls, a sentry post, and the keelboat's swivel gun mounted as a cannon. From the first days of construction, Indians came to see the Fort Mandan. They were intrigued by such a large structure. Curious Indians hung around all day and slept in the explorers' camps at night. The captains worried about security with Indians coming and going so casually, but as the days passed peacefully, the captains relaxed. Before long, all the explorers considered the neighboring Indians their friends. The soldiers began to visit the Mandan and Hidasta's village, often spending the night and sleeping in the Indian huts. Seaman liked the captains, eyed the Indian visitors suspiciously at first. He snapped the Indians' dogs if they came too close, but as the days passed and the explorers accepted the Indians as friends, Seaman allowed visitors to stroke his fur. He recognized the squaws who offered him chunks of dry